Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first part in our 5-part series on Your Data, Your Way, going through how to make your data work for you. So we're going to wait a minute to let a few more people in and then start. All right. So our first part in this 5-part series is going to focus on pulling in data and creating a unified profile. So we're going to try to get you going and to work to get to show you at a very low level detail how to create these unified profiles. We'll even be diving into the code a little bit. So we're going to start with a little intro from Hull to give you the context of what we do, and then show you what a unified profile looks like, and then the different ways you can ingest that and actually use it to drive your marketing campaigns, etc. One thing just to note, we will be sending out a Zoom link so that after the webinar, you can join us and ask us any data-related question that you want, or ask for more details on some of the stuff that we're going to show you today. So I think to start, hi, my name is Tim. I'm the head of product here at Hull. Angela put together this deck and was asking us some fun facts about ourselves. So fun fact about me, pre-COVID, my parents live in an area that has lots of lobster. We grew up with lots of lobster really cheap, and I drove 20 hours about a year ago with 50 live lobsters for a party that we were doing. It was pretty exhausting, but very tasty.
Yeah, and I'm Michał. I'm a product owner here at Hull. I mostly oversee the connectors development. And the fun fact about me is that when I was a student, I loved to do new things. So when somebody asked me to join a gospel choir rehearsals, I said, yeah, why not? Although I knew I wasn't a good singer, but I was actually so bad they asked me not to come again. So yeah, luckily there is no singing here in this
But
webinar.
you had more heart than any of them, I'm sure.
Yeah, I wanted really to give it a try.
All right. So to start out, a little bit of context about Hull. Hull is a customer data platform that brings in all of your marketing and sales data into one place, creates those unified profiles, and then with those profiles, you're able to cleanse your data, transform it, create new data points, and segment that data. And then you're able to use all of that data and fan it back out into your various sales and marketing tools to create much more personalized experiences for your prospects. So today we'll mostly be talking about the unified profile. Let's see. We were coming up with different names for the unified profile because there's so many. There's I think certainly the unified profile. There's the single source of truth. There's the golden record. There's the 360 view. I think generally, in my view, they're all talking about the same thing, but kind of interesting to think about how it's evolved over the years. So the first thing we're going to show you is a unified profile in Hull. We're going to talk about the different data points that exist and the different things that you're able to segment on. So I'll turn it over to my colleague Michał to kind of walk you through that.
Thanks, Tim. So I'll start by giving a quick overview of all three types of objects that we have in Hull. So we have accounts that represents groups of people such as companies. We have users who represents individual people, and we have user events that represent some activities related or performed by the user. We'll focus today on user and user events. Accounts will be covered in other webinars. So I'll share my screen right now and go directly into Hull application to show you a live sample of such profile. I'm on a profile prepared for the webinar today, a Teams account. There are two main sections here to see. On the left side, we see a sidebar with all the attributes related to that user. There are a few special attributes, such as email address, that we call an identifier that we use to stitch data together. We won't talk that much about identifiers today. And we also have segments that are right now empty for that user, and we'll show you how they work later during this webinar. But if I scroll down, you can see in different sections, in different groups, all the attributes related to that user coming from different sources. So for instance, we have data points coming from a CRM, which will be probably a CRM lead or contact object with some fields being already mapped and imported. And we also have a Livestorm data coming from a Livestorm webinar tool that we are using today. And we have data points such as job title, first name, last name, and company name. If I scroll back to the top, on the right side, the rest of the screen is filled in with the user timeline that presents events either performed or related to the user. So we see activities such as registered for a webinar. We could see activities related to the page navigation, like viewed certain page, like pricing page. But we also can see, so to speak, meta events related to the profile itself, such as attributes changed. Hull can compute and see that certain attributes have changed from one value to the other, and it can stamp that information on the user profile and user timeline. We also see a specific event for the user creation, and all that data, all the events with the properties that we'll maybe show in more details later, including all the attributes and also some attributes that we can compute within Hull based on data coming in from the different sources, can be used for the segmentation. We'll show you how the segmentation engine works later during this webinar, but right now we'll focus on how you can get that data in and how different integration can help you achieve that.
All right, so there's a lot of different integrations that Hull has. Certainly, all the big CRMs and most of the marketing automation systems. We make it pretty easy to pull that data in. We have nice interfaces that allow you to map the attributes and map incoming, outgoing data. But what we're going to focus on today is a different problem. So the problem of the 10,000 different marketing tools and actually this probably doesn't even show the change in marketing tools, the ones that go away and the ones that come back. But we know that there's always going to be integrations that we don't have, which is why we sort of have a suite of connector products that allow you to flexibly ingest lots of this different data. And that's what we'll be talking mostly about today. So as to give us a quick second to take the poll, I think it's in the polls tab there. Michał and I were talking earlier about what we thought the results of this poll were going to be, and it looks like it's about 6 to 10. That's what we thought. I think 1 to 5 was probably too little. 11 to 20 seemed like kind of difficult to think about. Oh, one person with 11 to 20. That's good to see, because a lot of the time at Hull, you may start out with 5 to 6, but over time, you're grabbing more data from your SQL database, or you're grabbing more from your warehouse, and you end up with certainly 20 or more connections. So that's interesting to see. So we're going to focus on two different types of flexible data ingestion today. And I think they're kind of the two opposite sides of the types of data that you get. So I think it'll give you a good overview of the different ways that we can ingest data. Certainly we have other ways as well, but these are kind of the ones that we'll show for the demo today. So the first one is incoming webhooks. So just a quick definition of a webhook. A lot of services have a hook that you can define that when a particular action happens, it will send to an HTTP endpoint. So for example, we're taking our webinar today as the example. When a certain person registered for the webinar, or when the webinar ends, Livestorm is going to send us a webhook that says this person registered. And taking that, we didn't have a LiveStorm integration at first because it's kind of a new tool for us, but we wanted to ingest this data to make sure that those events were on the users, on people's profiles. That way we're able to segment, do much more personalized things with it. So LiveStorm, like many other marketing tools, they don't have many native integrations either, because they kind of run into the same problem as we do. So it's in their best interest to offer, tools like webhooks to integrate with any given system. So now we're going to kind of dive in. Oh, we're going to dive in and actually get into some code. All right. All right. This is the Hull dashboard. It just gives you kind of a general overview of what's going on. What I'm first going to do is go to the connector screen and add a connector. So these are all the connectors that Hull has. I'm going to search specifically for incoming webhooks. Install, there's definitely some documentation there. Going to install an incoming webhook connector. So what an incoming webhook connector will provide for you is a link to a link to a point that the service that you want can hit with data. So in this case, LiveStorm has an integrations page where you can open up a custom webhook setting and paste in this link. So you'll notice right now that this is the only thing that the webhook can do. So there's no other settings. So the first thing we have to do is kind of figure out what kind of data we're ingesting. And so what I'm going to do quickly, oh, that's a really crazy screen, is show you just quickly how I sort of set up quickly set up some mock data for using in our webhook. So I use a very typical tool called Postman. I pasted the URL into the post URL, and then I copied some data from the mock data that LiveStorm gives, that they say they're going to be sending that when somebody registers. So here we see Angela's email. We see a few other of the things that the custom fields we were pulling. You see what webinar it is. So I hit send, and then we go back to the webhook screen. Okay. And so some of this is a little pre-prepared so that we don't face any connectivity issues. But essentially, you go back to the code screen, and now you see exactly the data that I just sent to the webhook. So now what we have to do is figure out how to take that data and make it meaningful on the user profile. So I'm going to take some code that I've written, and I'll walk you through it real quick because it's not too complicated, and we said that we would get pretty low level here. So the first thing that we're able to do is call Hull user traits. So traits are what we talked about before. Traits are attributes on a user profile. They're not really time sensitive. They're not really behavioral related. It's things like first name, last name, company, job title. So what we do is, first of all, we pick out how we want to identify the user. And in the second part of this series, we'll actually get much deeper into identity resolution. But for now, we'll just pick email. So we pick email from this body, which is attendee.email, which is right there. And then we could call a traits call with the traits that we want to put on the user. And we can see, as we modify this this code, the data on the right actually changes. So one of the features we and our customers really like is you're able to kind of develop in real time and see exactly what the outcome of what you're writing in the code interface is. So the second thing that I'll show you here is a track call. So a track call essentially is a way to create an event on the user profile. So an event is typically some sort of user behavior, some sort of time-bound piece of information. An event consists of a couple different things, one in particular being the event name and then the event properties. And as you can see here, I'm crafting a registered for webinar event. So I'm pulling certainly the company and the job title and a few other things, but also the referrer and the title of the webinar, so that we can segment based off of if a person went to a couple different webinars. And then things like the UTM source of where the person was coming from when they registered for the webinar. And actually, so I was actually talking with Angela about this right before this webinar. I typically, for event properties, and as long as the proper attributes are namespaced, I like to pull in a little bit more than I need, as long as it's sort of self-contained. You don't want to pull in a ton of data to an area where lots of other data is being pulled into too. That creates other problems. But I typically like to get as much as I can because I don't necessarily know what I'm going to use up front. It does make me a little bit of a data hoarder, but as long as, like I said, as long as you can keep it kind of organized in namespaces and within the events, I think it's fine, and we can use them later for sure. And so I'll show you what this, I'll show you exactly what the attributes and the events look like now in the timeline. So here's Angela's profile. We've got a registered for webinar on the timeline, and we've got all of the properties that we set. And the great thing about this is once you've written it once, we wrote this, I think, a month ago. Any webinar that you host now, that we host in Livestorm now, we get all of this data on an ongoing basis. And then we'll see here at the bottom that these Livestorm attributes are there within the Livestorm group. Now, one other thing that I'll briefly touch on, because things like job title, for example, could be coming from multiple places. What we like to do as the first step is to unify the profile based off of the identity, which is the email. And then you have sort of different groups for each one of the services that you have. Then the second step is to actually unify the attributes themselves. So for job title, for instance, you might have a job title in the CRM, a job title that came through Livestorm. What the next step here, which we won't talk too much about in this webinar, is you want to be able to create a unified attribute as well. And we have a couple different strategies for that, like fallback, where your CRM is the highest priority, then comes the rest of them, or based off of which one changed in the latest. We'll talk about that, I think, in a subsequent webinar. So that that kind of sums up the incoming webhooks portion. I'm going to turn it over to Mihao now to show you a very different type of data ingestion.
Thanks, Tim. So I'll start by saying that, let's say the incoming webhooks is an example of fighting the challenge of ever-growing number of different tools that you may need to integrate with or connect to your customer data platform now or in future. But there is a different type of problem that we face at Hull, are all those different types of sources that are different by nature for every customer. And the primary example of that are databases, especially your product DB or your warehouse. By the design, your DB comes empty and you need to figure out your own data structure. So let's see right now how our SQL importer helps adapt to different structures of database and how we can map that into Hull data model. I will share my screen again to show you a sample database that contains, this is a Postgres DB that you may use for your product. On the right side, we have the Schema Explorer, so I'll explain you really quick what we've got here. We have the free trial users. So, that's a usual pattern we see across customers of ours. We have a single table with all the users of their product, and we have a couple of basic data points. When the record was created, the email address of the user, some ID, plan that that user picked for the free trial, and an array of strings explaining which products that person decided to trial. And here I have 2 records added for that demo. 2 people signed up for a pro plan and testing out a couple of products. So right now I'll switch from that DB view into our dashboard again. And I have SQL Importer installed and set up already, but I'll show you how easy it is to set up and connect. Obviously, as with any database tool, we need to start with some connection information. So we usually get them from IT departments to fill in the host name, database name, username, and password. Once Once the credentials are present, we can define some basic information about the configuration of that import. The main important parameter is the import type, which corresponds to the types of objects that we want import thanks to that SQL importer. As mentioned earlier, we have users, accounts, and events. For that specific example, I will use the users import type, which will create attributes on the user profile. Once I'm good with the setup here, I have all my credentials and basic information set up. I'll get back to the overview page and to the query editor, which is the core part of the SQL importer. And I think it's pretty consistent in the user experience with the incoming webhooks. So it shows us a query editor, place where we write the query. It can be as complex as you need. So it's standard query that you may get from your IT department. If you need to query a couple of tables, it's possible. This sample is very basic. I mostly do a renaming, so it's a very similar idea as Teams incoming webhooks connectors. So I take a couple of those columns from that free trial table. I put them in a group of attributes. This is where this slash notation is important. I will show you on the user profile in a moment how that what's the result. And I also make some decisions about the identifiers. As Tim mentioned, we'll cover the identity resolution in later webinar session, and we'll stick to a very basic email-based scenario right now. And at the end, I decide from which table the data comes in. And we also, in the SQL importer, expose a feature to provide you an easy way to preview the results. That's something our customers love, that when they work on the query, they are not sure what would be the result. They can always hit the preview, which will give you the live result directly from the DB. So we'll take the sample of data. In our case, we just had those 2 users, so we got the same 2 users, but we can see and verify if the data is coming in the correct places. So yeah, the email address is under email column. It is a string. Plan information is here. We also get the array, which is great, and we also get the timestamp at the end. So when I'm ready with the data, I'm okay with the structure of the data, I can hit the import button, which will perform the full import of the whole database. It's great for the initial sync. It's great for some historical backfills. So I'll trigger it. The job started in the background. We'll see the results shortly on the user profile. I will close that model. Obviously, from now, we would like that integration to run on a defined interval that I can specify in the settings of the connector. But there is a challenge here. If the DB is big, pulling the whole database, all the rows every time may create a lot of load and performance issue. So that's why we expose a feature called incremental queries, so that in the query editor, we allow you to use additional parameters which you may use in your query. So I'll make that query a little bit more complex. I'll add a where clause, and let's assume I have updated at column in my DB. If you were paying attention to my structure, you know that I don't have it, but I probably should. Usually the DB will contain this kind of attribute. And let's say I want to get only users that were updated after last run. And I can use last updated at parameter like this. And the connector will replace that part with a specific timestamp of the previous run. So my job was running in the background. I'll get back to the user profile I was showing you before. And if I scroll down on the list of attributes on the left, we can see this block of information. They are nicely grouped together, so it's easy to distinguish data coming from Livestorm from data coming from the free trial. The created ad is parsed correctly. The plan was a simple string, but the products are an array of information. So let's go to the users list and see how we can now activate that combined data, which was simply stitched together using the email address, to start segment our users based on either the free trial behavior or the Livestorm behavior. So let's say that the users who sign up for the Pro free trial are interesting for us because they are more willing to subscribe for bigger plans. So I'll add an attribute on our users list. That's our segmentation engine that we want to give you just a quick overview of. And I will search for plan, and I can quickly find the free trial plan. And I'll ask only for those who have Pro trial plan. And I get 2 results. But let's say we know that for among those users, those who additionally register for a webinar have much higher conversion rate. So these are the most valuable people to target with our campaigns. So I'll add, this time maybe I did it too quick. I can hit add an event. That's a place where our segmentation engine allows you to ask different data points. And I will search for registered for webinar event and give me all the users who have that event at least once in their timeline over the retention period. I can drill that segment even further. I can say, okay, I only want for people from a specific webinar name, your data, your way. And that's my segment. Now I can save that segment, give it some name that I can recognize. I could call it Pro Trial plus Webinar. And I can save that segment. And when it's saved, that data will be both stored on the user profile as an array of segment names. And now I can send out that information to any other tool that I have connected with our native integrations, or maybe some custom integrations as well. So that was the whole scenario end to end, getting data from Livestorm, getting data from the SQL Importer, stitching together using the email address, and creating a segment based on behavior and attributes data from both services.
Okay. So just to recap, we kind of gave you a general overview of when we can go really deep into native integrations with all the kinds of attribute mapping. And then we gave you kind of a much more detailed view of, could you come back on how the link via email was made? Why don't Alexander, just why don't you join the Zoom call right after, and we can get into that a little bit more. Awesome. So and then we showed you kind of a code view and a SQL view of how to ingest this data. I think one thing to mention in addition is we can ingest not just from SQL operational databases, but also from your warehouses, your BigQuery, your Snowflake, and your Redshift. So those are all things that we're very used to getting data from to stitch together the profiles. So the next webinar, we're going to be talking a little bit more about identity resolution. This is one that we could probably talk about for a while. Maybe we'll even talk about it in the Zoom call afterwards. There's all kinds of ways to stitch together profiles based off of different pieces of information that you have. We can talk a little deterministic and a little bit non-deterministic, maybe even. So thank you all for coming. Angela just posted the Zoom link for questions afterwards. It doesn't even have to be about the webinar. It can be about any kind of data issue that you have. Really, we're all data geeks here, so any question will go. All right, thank you guys.